Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out early for us on a Thursday morning to hear a little bit about Route 1. I am Larry Tweel. I'm CEO of the Howard County Economic Development Authority. Most of you are here. My team reached out to you to join us this morning, so I do appreciate you being here. And just so you know who we are, the Economic Development Authority, we work with businesses in the county, resident businesses, on your issues, expansion issues, other types of issues. We also work on business attraction, small business financing. We have a lot of services. Because most of you are resident businesses, and you have, if you have any questions, issues, things that we can help you with, you should know who we are. So I'd like my team to just stand up, raise your hand, make yourself known, because if anybody wants to talk to you, they want to put a face with a name, and they know how to find you. So any issues you might have as it relates to your business questions, concerns, expansion, workforce development folks, or workforce development issues, we can connect you with those folks. Fran Trout and her team are in the room as well. So training, any type of business issue you may have, the team is here. The team is here to help you. We've brought you here today to learn about the Route 1 Master Plan, the implementation strategy that is being embarked upon, and we're going to have the folks from Planning and Zoning talk to you about what that is. But first, I'd like to bring up our county executive. Route 1 has been an important issue on his agenda, and I want him to share a few words. So, our county executive, Alan Kittleman.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I've been really brief because we're here to hear about the revitalization strategy, and I appreciate you coming out today on a cold morning. There's been an awful lot of studies done about Route 1, even before I was in office, but not a whole lot of talk about how to implement what we've learned. And so that's what this is all about, is having you hear some of the ideas that we are looking at to do to make Route 1 better, to improve Route 1 after all the input we've been getting. And then today is also an opportunity for you to get some questions, ask some questions, and we can continue to modify it even more. So the whole goal here is to start implementing some of the strategies, and we want you to be a big part of that. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. That's all you need to hear from me. My Chief of Staff, I should make sure you know that Diane Wilson is here, my Chief of Staff as well. So if you have any questions for the County Executive's Office, you can grab me or Diane. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy Gowen, our Deputy Director of the Department of Planning and Zoning. And I think she'll have a couple words, then she'll introduce the consultants. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Amy Gowen. I'm actually speaking for our Director of Planning and Zoning, Val Lasdens, who couldn't be here today. First, I want to start by thanking the County Executive for supporting this initiative, and also to Larry Tweel and the EDA for partnering with us on this important endeavor. The Route 1 corridor is a critical component of Howard County's success. It's a major transportation route for both vehicles and rail. It's a place of historic and new communities, and it's home to our industrial base. It provides important services and businesses not found elsewhere in the county. So it's not a coincidence that we're kicking this off with a business breakfast. As our planning process will be sensitive to market conditions, and hearing from our business owners around this table is a very important first step for us. We are very fortunate. We have a great consulting team that's going to be leading this effort, RKG Associates and Roadside and Harwell. They're both based out of Alexandria, and they have extensive experience in corridor planning. So with that, I am pleased to introduce Russ Archambault, Vice President and Principal at RKG, and I'm going to turn it over to him to lead this morning's discussion. Russ?
What we wanted to do is give you a little background on the process that we're embarking on the Route 1 corridor, share some earlier ideas. Much of the substantive findings and the recommendations are likely to come probably in this spring. As was alluded to, this is not the normal process that you might have been used to in the past, where you've gone through and identified opportunities. We are sort of taking a departure from previous efforts, starting to vet those ideas. The ones that still hold true today are ones that we're going to carry forward. The ones that maybe have outlived their usefulness, we're going to discard, and we're going to bring in new ideas that are more contemporary maybe speak to current market opportunities and the sort of the changing dynamics of the region's economy. As a consultant team, I wanted to just sort of bring you up to date as to why we're doing this and what we're trying to achieve. This is obviously a revitalization strategy. You're talking about remaking an urban corridor. It's something that we've been involved in across the country. We're trying to deal with the transportation issues that are relevant to Route 1. We've had some safety issues. We've had congestion that's going to persist into the future. What can we do to start to make improvements to that? We need to identify critical public infrastructure that's needed to support future investments. And when I'm talking about investments, it's also sort of private development investments. I think if you sort of visualize what we're doing here, we're trying to remake and sort of change the functionality of the Route 1 corridor over time. Historically, has sort of been that major north-south highway that sort of brought traffic up and down the East Coast. It doesn't really fill that role anymore. It's more regional focused at this point. I-95 have taken that traffic away. So now it functions differently. It has the remnants of those early times. At least in Howard County, you have some of the old motels that sort of used to cater to that traffic. But in the future, we can see different uses there. The strategies that we come up with, what we're going to be doing over the next 6 months is starting to vet those ideas. We're going to be meeting with people, property owners, real estate developers, people who have the ability to change the outcome of the corridor and change the direction. So it's not putting out ideas that can't be tested. We will be testing them, presenting concepts to you come the spring. And ultimately, we're trying to improve the business vibrancy and the character of the corridor throughout the 12 miles and looking for opportunities where that can be done. The team that's going to be involved in this include RKG Associates. We're the lead. We're development economists. We're real estate advisors. We're planners, really people who help come up with the concepts and bring in the feasibility aspects of projects like this. We're a small niche firm. We do this throughout the country. We're basically hired to help people formulate ideas that can be implemented, and that's what we've been asked to do here. Now, the remainder of the team consists of Roadside and Harwell, who you heard about. They are a placemaking and urban design firm in Alexandria, very experienced, very well known within the region. They will give the sort of the design context to whatever recommendations are made, and I think everyone will agree that there are parts of the Route 1 corridor that are not particularly attractive. There's no sense of place. There's no transition visually as you move down the corridor, and there needs to be something a little bit more defined. WZHA, they're expert financial analysts. They're going to help to understand the development feasibility of what recommendations will be made. We will be convening what we're calling an expert development panel in the spring, which will basically give the opportunity for key property owners, real estate development companies, public officials, maybe state officials, to come around a table, sort of see some of the early ideas. They will be allowed to critique those ideas, and we'll refine them, share them with the public as we move forward. So this is very much about what are the solutions that are available to us, how do we get there, what will it cost to do that, and then how do we actually implement. These last two firms, Tool Design and Foursquare, these are firms that specialize in transportation and public transit. And although the Route 1 corridor is not really a public transit corridor, it has some potential in the future. We want to explore that and see how that can better work. Now, what are people saying about the Route 1 corridor? Well, we had a forum on Monday, candidate forum, that sort of had this issue at hand. Some of the comments that came out of that is that people are concerned about the rate of growth, the density of growth. Certainly, some communities are impacted differently than others. People wanted to see the infrastructure follow the growth so it could be supported. They have some concerns about Route 1, the need to move ahead with a desired course of action rather than to focus on a plan. And they want to stop studying, they want to do something now. I've heard this comment before. It's a common theme. People want to just get it done. However, as time goes by, the opportunities rise and fall, and they're sort of dependent on the development cycle. So we're now in a different development cycle. We're on the tail end of it, probably. I think we're probably realistically planning for the next business cycle. So I think it's an appropriate time to sort of get at what are the new opportunities that are out there. People want something that's visionary. They don't want administrative tweaks. They think that the challenges at hand require something more than that. They want to bring state and federal funding to the table where possible. We'll be looking at those opportunities. And then they want to be better served, I think, as a business community and as residents, people who live along the corridor, they want to have it work for them, and I understand that. Now, why do we care about this area? Well, good question. Some people say, well, I try to avoid Route 1. Well, you all have businesses along the corridor. You have a vested interest. You're at a critical location between Baltimore and Washington, a very desirable location that whether you wanted to be the target for development interest, you are. Route 1 is an important element of that. Now keep in mind that we have the I-95 corridor, we have Route 1 corridor, we have the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. We have probably, I don't know the exact number, but I would say we probably have 150,000 jobs within maybe a 5-mile radius of here. So this is where people come to work. There's lots of people who are moving in here through new residential development. This is the growth area not only for Howard County, but if you go over the border, that's the growth area for Anne Arundel County. All of their jobs are being funneled into their northern tier. Yours is being sort of funneled into your eastern tier. And this is being done to protect some of the more rural and agricultural areas of both counties. So there's a design to all of this, although it may not seem like it all the time. This is the designated growth area for Howard County. It's certainly one of the areas. We have very high incomes. Howard County has been growing rapidly since the 70s. It has one of the highest household income levels in the region. About 53% of the households have incomes above $100,000. This is way above the national average. It is sort of typical of the greater DC, Baltimore area, but you stand out even amongst those competitors. Now, when I say that the jobs are clustered on the sort of eastern side of the county, I'm not lying about that. And you can see here, this is a map that shows the density of jobs. The darker the blue area, the higher the density per square mile. The bubbles represent the size of the jobs in terms of the number of people employed by an employer. So you see this sort of line up along the Route 1 corridor between 95 and the county borders, about 55,000 jobs. So very important for the economic development of the county. Now, who's using this space? Well, you all are aware that we have predominantly a very large industrial base here. So the purple that shows on this map is very defined, and that's the industrial base that sits off of the Route 1 corridor. It is dominant. It has a lot of jobs. It's not going anywhere. It's quite healthy. The question becomes, what other, as you go down the corridor, what properties are in play? Which properties are sort of falling out of favor, meaning that they're underutilized? They have risen and fallen from their peak economic usefulness. Maybe the owners are getting older, they're looking to sell the properties, they're not as actively engaged in their businesses. Those are the sort of things that you look for when you start to analyze the opportunities along a corridor like this. The red is more commercial focused, and the green and yellow areas are open space and residential communities. So we have this dumbbell sort of arrangement here. We have residential communities on both sides, Savage and Elkridge. You have pressures that are building there, while in the middle you have this strong economic base that is sort of going through an evolution. Now, early observations about the corridor. Some people have asked, why hasn't more happened? And I think when you're talking about a complex urban corridor, it's not always that easy, and it requires certain things to be in place to have some success and see change occur. Well, change is occurring whether we want it to or not. You'll judge whether or not it's positive or negative. But you're in a highly competitive region. There are a lot of opportunities that real estate investors and developers are pursuing, where they're the most difficult to realize those opportunities. Those are sort of shelved in favor of those that are a little easier to get to. Now, I would put the Route 1 corridor in the category of difficult to solve. It's not easy. The land use mix and the ownership pattern is complex. The development community engaged in redevelopment, which is taking existing uses, removing them, and putting up newer uses, is difficult to do, and it's highly specialized. And quite frankly, it brings a level of risk associated with those developments that some developers just don't have the appetite for. They'd rather go develop a greenfield site in a location where they can build by right. There's not going to be the same complexity involved, and they'll get their project done in some predictable period of time. That's not what's happening here. That's not what the opportunities are. So these are harder to get at. Land assemblage, which is often required, is sort of the acquisition of land, of contiguous parcels to create something large enough to do a project of certain scale or size. That's hard to do. It's costly. It takes a number of years to accomplish. And if you sort of look at that reality and sort of compare that against other opportunities, most developers or property owners will sort of pass on that and move on to other things. What you have to do to sort of bridge that gap is you need to provide some incentives to the real estate community to sort of encourage them to take that risk and to bring some benefit for that effort. Because it's longer duration, it's it's harder to predict the outcome. There will be public discourse and opposition over years that sort of impact that process. So what typically happens is that these projects sort of move forward at with a certain momentum, but that momentum is usually initiated by the public sector, in this case, county government. There's not a lot of opportunities when you look down the corridor. There's not a lot of vacant land. There's not a vacant and abandoned properties in any great number, which is typically what you would encounter. These are all fairly productively used businesses and properties, and they're not derelict, they're not blighted. So it makes things a bit challenging, because if people are profiting from the use of their property, there's no incentive for them to not continue to do that. But I will admit, as you sort of look at those opportunities, you realize that there's a number of uses occurring that really aren't the highest and best use for those properties. It is what the current owners are pursuing, but it doesn't mean that will continue indefinitely. And I think those are the opportunities that we have to ferret out as a team. One thing that I will sort of share with you is that although there's an economic development authority in the county, redevelopment has not really been their charge. And the question is, if the county is going to get more engaged in these activities, then it needs to have the staffing and the capabilities to do that. And this is sort of a different skill set than the typical economic development. So it's something to think about. You need to have the proper organizational structure in place to do that. And that we're looking for good models for that. And then finally, we don't really have the sort of institutional partners that one would want to have along a corridor like this that you could sort of rely on as sort of support as part of a redevelopment effort. There are no major colleges or institutions or hospitals or larger players that sort of lend their support or bring the weight behind an effort like this. They're out there, but they're not the traditional ones. We'll have to find them. What is the view from Route 1? This is why you've been asked to come here today, and I want to sort of engage you in a discussion about how this corridor serves or does not serve your purposes. I want to sort of hear your perspective. Where do you come from in this regard? And it's certainly going to be a different perspective than we heard from residents on Monday night. But what is your opinion about the Route 1 corridor as a place to do business? How does it lend to your success or create challenges that you have to overcome? So it's an open question. I'd like to hear some people talk about it.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mohsen Harirat. I'm interested to know why Howard County buys the private lands on Route 1 with tax dollar money.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Why they buying properties with tax dollar money and they become the competitor of private businesses?
I'm not familiar with the historical practice of doing that, but I will tell you that that is sort of alluding to what I mentioned before about having a public partner that can be engaged in the redevelopment process, working with private developers. And it's not unusual in other communities for the public sector to go out and acquire properties. If you don't have property to bring to the game, then you're not really engaged in the game. So I can't speak to the specific examples that you're referencing, but there may be opportunities in the future where that has to occur.
I mean, why can't they offer it to the citizens of the Howard County so they can come and buy it rather than the government owns it?
That may be.
Why should the government own the property? That's basically, they're not in the business. They're in the business of service. They're not for the county, for the private citizens. It's a business, not for themselves.
It is a good question, and it may be that the relationship created in the future is that if there is no one to intervene to purchase that property, then maybe the county, if it's a strategic property, intervenes and controls that, and at some point enters into a partnership agreement with a private individual or development company to make the right thing happen at those locations. So it comes in all forms.
Who makes the decision?
What's that?
Who makes that decision that that's the right thing to do?
You know, it's going to depend on what the strategy is. So if the strategy is no one's doing anything at this key location, no private individual has stepped up to acquire the property to change the use, someone needs to do something. In that case, the public sector may be the only alternative to get that process started. And it may be just as a conduit move to sort of take the property down, set the stage for redevelopment to occur, and then find the appropriate private entity to redevelop the site. That's how this gets done.
So they're going to put it up for sale when they buy it, or they're just going to keep?
No, I think you would do that. You wouldn't do it just to acquire property. You would do it in a strategic locations because you want to make a different outcome occur than what's been there historically.
I don't know what to tell you, but it's not the right thing to do.
I will tell you that if the question or in people's minds is why hasn't more happened, it's because there's no mechanism for these sort of things to get resolved. And it's quite a common practice for a public sector redevelopment authority to intervene, to acquire properties, and to find the appropriate private partner to redevelop those. And sometimes they'll sit there indefinitely. They may have other encumbrances that are keeping private individuals away from those properties. Let's say they're contaminated or they have other restrictions. There's no incentive for people to intervene in those cases. So we're not looking just to acquire property just to mass a real estate portfolio. It would be a very strategic move. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. Question for you and sort of the study approach. Given that Route 1 is a state highway, how much and how will the state be involved in working through this effort?
Well, they have been involved and they will continue to be involved. And this is always a sort of a challenge when you're talking about altering the public right-of-way and the travel-way. They're very concerned. SHA will sort of govern a lot of what we can do or can't do. They have been involved thus far in the sort of the safety study that was done recently by the county to identify those areas that have sort of resulted in some accidents or some deaths in some cases. So trying to fix those, they've been very cooperative. if we were to come up with recommendations through this process that alter the travel way, either add lanes or come up with other solutions, they're going to have to sign off on that. But they understand the importance of the Route 1 corridor, and they know what we're trying to do. It will maybe take some political weight to convince them that whatever recommendations are needed are important to this community and are important for the future functionality of the corridor. Yes, sir.
Thank you. One of my concerns is that Route 1, and again, this sort of ties into it being a state road, is basically a 50-mile-an-hour road. Previous plans have always envisioned a community along Route 1 that kind of ignores the fact that you have traffic flying by at 50 miles an hour. And it's sort of envisioned that this community would just sort of exist. So the way the corridor's broken up right now with land uses makes it very difficult for that to happen. So I think any plan has to take into consideration the realities that Route 1 is a highway. And if it's not going to be a highway, then it should be changed from being a highway. But it can't remain sort of as it is if we're going to try and change what's happening along it. A lot of the previous plans considered that it would be sort of a contiguous retail pedestrian environment, knowing full well that there's a lot of properties maybe that won't flip for a while and that there's industrial behind. I just think whatever's created has to figure in sense of place, and it's not going to be one place, it'll probably be several places, and somehow there maybe needs to be a connection that's not Route 1, but maybe some secondary corridors behind it that help pull some of these communities together, because right now, you'll see that, you know, the speed and the drive-by mentality, you either go to a place and sort of live there and then commute to somewhere, but there aren't a whole lot of livable areas where there are, you know, where there's really live, work, play, or just when you come home, you have to go somewhere to shop and do everything else as well.
Is your sense that to be successful, we need to be able to affect that? We need to be able to slow traffic down or constrain it in some limited way to create this more pedestrian-friendly environment?
I don't necessarily think that may not happen, which would mean that maybe you take sections of the road, sections of the corridor, and create these spaces, and maybe they do have a secondary spine behind them so that you can get off of Route 1 and slow down and then be in a place. You know, right now you're going to drive somewhere, you're going to park, you're going to get back in your car, and you're going to go. You're not, you know, there aren't places like downtown Columbia. I'm not saying we're going to create a downtown Columbia, but even maybe a village center, or, you know, just, there needs to be some nodes of places, and right now it really is a highway. So there aren't these senses of places. I work for Tapco Properties. We developed about 1,000 residential units. We're finishing our last phase from the corner of Route 1 and 175. We're trying to create our own sense of place, and we have the ability that there are some other residential developments behind and next to us, but still, it's really a challenge. You know, you can't figure that people are going to drive there unless you have something to attract them. And most of the development to date really hasn't been to do that. It's been to require people to face Route 1 and expect people to walk or come, you know, it's not really set up for that.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit since you've volunteered, but you know, you have a unique perspective here, someone who's trying to make change occur in a very targeted way. The challenges that you're sort of articulating are some that sort of are speaking to the need to sort of look at the corridor in a more holistic way. Where are those opportunities going to be, realizing that you can't create that sort of placemaking for 12 miles. You're probably going to be able to do it in certain strategic areas where it's going to have an impact. It sounds like in your experience, you're trying to do this as a sort of individual company, but you can only have so much impact on your property and not the properties around that. Speak a little bit about the need to have this strategy and a public sector partner that is supporting that strategy and what that means?
We're in a unique situation on ours. The current zoning, we're a CLI zone, and I know they're looking at changing a lot of the zoning. I assume this would have to go hand in hand with a lot of that as well.
Right.
We faced a lot of challenges trying to comply with existing old Route 1 guidelines and zoning. We may be the only property to actually finish a development under that zone, I think, ever, because the zone will probably go away before anyone else ever is forced to, hopefully. So having a public partner is great. We've actually paid money into a lot of funds on our project. We actually paid money into a fund to revitalize our little section of Route 1. I'm not sure that project will ever happen. For a traffic light, we actually did get a traffic light. We're paying into a fee that will actually put money into a fund so that the county can develop commercial property. Like you were speaking, we actually put some money into a fund because originally we were supposed to develop a couple 100,000 square feet of retail on our property, which, never could have, we couldn't have ever supported that.
Yeah.
So we actually paid a fee to spur development, so the county would have some money to spur some development, and that we would have a little less retail on our site, which will still probably be a lot for what we're doing.
So you're speaking to an issue in the past. I guess the policy has been, well, let's try to get individual projects to contribute to this sort of placemaking and mixed-use development form that will evolve down the corridor. It was setting a planning vision and then requiring others to sort of implement that on a place-by or site-by-site basis. What we're falling back on now is the notion that it's hard to do that, and in some cases it imposes a requirement on a individual property owner or developer that's really not in the best interest of that location or that property. And you need to have a more comprehensive view of where is it appropriate to create that type of environment and who are the property owners that are most likely to be impacted by that. Because you can't have 12 miles of linear retail. That's probably not what would be envisioned. But you maybe can have at certain key locations where it's appropriate and where it makes sense. So I think we're sort of moving away from that standard, or that sort of directive, into a more strategic, place-based process where redevelopment and placemaking is occurring at certain locations that make sense, that will be supported by the market, that's not sort of imposing a vision on a place that just can't support it. So I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Right. Just one quick follow-up. I mean, as you do this, and I'm sure you've looked all up and down Route 1, the previous guidelines were very prescriptive, so they didn't allow a whole lot of creativity on the developer's side. So if you wanted to develop, you were pretty much going to create something that looked like X, Y, or Z, or maybe not the appearance, but the way it's set up, parking in front or parallel parking on Route 1 or something. You'll see a few developments that made the attempt to prescribe, and many of them have vacancies years and years after they've been done. So I would just, ask that you all keep that in mind as you go to try to keep some flexibility in sort of how people can configure their properties or their areas. If you're creating a node, think globally as to how that will actually work and give your developers some, opportunity to maybe get creative.
Good point. How many people own their own business? See, raise their hands. How is this corridor as a place to do business? Could you be better off somewhere else? I'm not encouraging you to leave by any stretch, but I want to know what motivates you to be on Route 1.
Oh, thank you. Ming Heil from Heil Plumbing, if you need a plumber. So just speaking from our experience in our business, we have commercial plumbing, residential plumbing, and excavation services. So we need that industrial zoning. We're a growing business, and we are currently considering how to expand, and it's almost impossible in Howard County. We're looking at other places. Right now, we're in the area, we're not on Route 1, but for some reason, we're zoned the CE-CLI overlay, which really restricts what we can do with our property. And the concern I have is the east part of Howard County is the only area with that industrial zoning. And so you're trying to take a space, which is, as you mentioned, an economic hub, for the county. And when I read the zoning requirements, it just really sounded ridiculous to me. You want pedestrian, of course there are newer businesses that are coming in, apartments being developed, so that makes sense to me, especially in the northern and southern ends where there's a lot of residential. But in the spaces we're in, my concern is what are we doing to make sure the needs of the businesses that use the industrial, that need that industrial zoning, what are you doing to serve them, to make sure our trucks can go in and out, and that we can expand?
Well, I think we need to be able to balance all those needs, and you're speaking to a need that may be different than someone else's need, but I think what you're describing is that you have a business that sort of requires a number of different things happening on your property that is different than just a storefront to another business. It's the ability to store things on your property, it's the ability maybe to have shops on the back of your property. It's a number of things going on that are really more conducive to an industrial zone than perhaps a retail or commercial zone. So we need to be able to sort of balance that. Well, who's doing business here? Who's likely to do business here in the future? What sort of zoning flexibility do they need to be able to operate the business, to grow their business? Industrial is obviously a dominant use on the corridor, so how do we allow those businesses to grow into the future and maybe allow others to come in and do business there as well? I think changes will occur, but I think we need to be able to support the people there now who are investing in the corridor and need to continue to grow.
I think there's a reason why you said those properties are locked in, and the values being driven up, because there is no M2 spaces, so they're holding on to that, so.
You're speaking to an issue that occurs uniquely as corridors change. The people who have been in business for a number of years may be rethinking their strategy. Maybe they're getting older, they're looking to sell the property. The zoning and what can be permitted there has everything to do with the value of those properties. They may not be the ones that realize that value, but they want to preserve the value, so if they do sell, that something else can occur there and they'll get some value out of that property. So that's one of the things that we will be looking to discover is what's the motivations of the key properties along the corridor, what are their plans? They won't always tell us, but we inevitably find out that some people are sitting on properties all for the wrong reasons. They're just waiting for time to go by. They're not looking to cash out right now. They're waiting for improvements to occur in the economy or maybe a rezoning to occur that might add some value. We need to be able to find, those opportunities. Anyone else? Good.
I'm not up on things that are happening on Route 1 right now, but there was talk about taking the trucks off of Route 1 and circling them around and coming back on Route 1 further down where the residential places are popping up, like around Route 175. Route 1 is where we're located is very strategic for businesses. You have Route 32, Route 1, 95. The trucks, we're in the trucking business, fixing trucks. So the trucks traveling up and down that corridor need to come off of Route 1, need to come off of 95 for services, and everything that gets delivered in this country, everybody's needs gets delivered by trucks. So to make them go someplace else, to service all the businesses in that corridor, I think their needs are not being addressed.
Okay,
To throw the residential people in with the trucks, and now they want the trucks to go away because now it's a residential area. I don't know, I don't see how that's working with, I can see the residents complaining about, hey, you have to slow down on Route 1 because like, hey, we want to make it a residential area and put in walkways or maybe put in a village center. But right there is just so strategic for the businesses that are there. I mean, that's why they want to come, and when you want to advertise your property, like, hey, I am so strategically located here for you.
Well, that's what we're charged with, is trying to balance those needs. That's a natural conflict there between a residential homeowner and a business that needs 18-wheelers to come and service the business. And there's lots of those users along the corridor, so we have to finally find a balance there that doesn't sort of displace trucks and make it harder to get there, and then Route 1 loses some of its benefits. So we don't have a solution for you today, but I'm aware of that issue, and we'll be working on it. Yes, sir.
Morning, Bob Hennig from Bob's BMW. We're one of your customers. I know where your property is. There is M1 and M2 zoning around that might be a next good home for you. But more to the point, and I admire the shoes you and your peers are wearing. This is a daunting task at best. And I've got a long list of things that I won't go into today, but a couple of the points I want to make have to do with, I've been in the Route 1 corridor for almost 30 years now on Guilford Road. Watched a lot of changes, watched a lot of the same crap hole pieces of properties sit, maybe not vacant, but poorly used, giving that 12-mile stretch a true eyesore vision. You've got some bold developers, the Patuxent down there, that is putting up lots of residential, trying to create a community. I get that part, and at the same time, I don't understand the county's desire, zoning conditions, to have all that property, the facings of residentials that are that high, so close to Route 1, which will completely eliminate the ability for Route 1 to be widened down the road as traffic grows, and it will. We don't have sidewalks running up and down the 12 miles of Route 1, let alone hundreds of other miles of sidewalks that are needed. And if you're going to have an area that is connected, you have to have the ability, especially with all that residential going in, and businesses that people who live in one place could walk a half a mile. You're forcing people to walk on the streets. You see it on Route 1 all the time. So some happy balance of the infrastructure, whether it's roads or pull-offs, as a few of the places have to serve a small number of businesses, and the ability for people to get to bus stops without walking in the roads, to get up and down this corridor. I think some of that needs to be put in place first. County has the ability to capture right-of-way to do some of that infrastructure, to put in curb cuts where they think, all right, while this might be 3 properties, we're going to put in a curb cut here, we're going to develop that land and begin to improve the corridor in general, and it may become more enticing for some people to do small businesses. We would love to be on Route 1. We've tried unsuccessfully 3, maybe 4 times in the last 10 years. We can't either get the parcels put together, or you've got small properties with big buildings that don't work for us. And we don't want to be in a cluster full of retail, because typically I don't need all those other small businesses. And every time we put in another small shopping center with a bunch of a barber shop and a nail spa and another convenience store, we seem to have more CVS and other type of pharmacies around here to support the world's population, let alone ours. We don't need more gas stations, and that slows the traffic down on Route 1. I can only imagine what it's like for truckers around here to do that stuff. So while I see the big plan, and I've listened to this a number of times, I'd like to see something on a map that says these are the properties we are targeting. This is what we want to have changed. I'd like to see the land that the county owns. I've been in the offices a few times and talked about various properties and plans we had. Some people a lot of people actually, are really sitting on land hoping that some more of this development plan will come into place, so that their property value will go up another 25 to 50 or 100%, and then they'll cash out. So they prevent that development from taking place when you've got a lot of businesses, some in this room and plenty that are not, that would like to make the investment, but the price of that investment is getting higher and higher, and as a few others pointed out, the obstacles to get your business onto Route 1 or Route 175 or one of the other corridors where you would be able to grow more are becoming larger and larger and more expensive, eliminating the time it takes to do a development. And I've built from the ground up. I know what the time is involved. I know what the cost is involved. It can be done pretty smoothly, or it can take 3 times as long as that. And I think most of the businesses that Howard County would like to see along Route 1 growing and flourishing don't have 3 years to wait.
Well, you sort of made or reinforced a point I made earlier about the difficulty for a private individual to sort of assemble properties to grow their own business, whether or not they're a developer or a private business owner. But what you described is essentially what we're going to do here. We're going to identify those targeted areas where we think infrastructure needs to be in place to support a different development form, which will in effect do what you've described. It will sort of give some focus as to where that happens, what those investments need to be, and what the desired development form should be. And that's not something that we'll cook up in some back room. We'll come up with ideas that the community will have to respond to and say, look, this looks good, this is something that we would see as desirable, and we believe that there should be some targeted investment in these areas for things to occur. We're not at that point yet, but you've sort of laid out the process we're following, and stay tuned, because I think you'll hear more along those lines.
If I could add one short little end to that, thank you for your response. What all of this has caused in the last 8 to 10 years, I'm still a pretty young guy, I'd still like to grow my business to the next level, but I've begun to look outside the county because I don't have any choice. You know, people are courting us, they'd like us to be in Anne Arundel, they'd like us to be in Prince George's. I serve a pretty wide area of client base, and we are a destination location, the kind of business that I think Howard County wants to have here. We're not a Dick's or a Target or a CVS, but we bring people in from out of state that spend money on food and motel rooms and hotel rooms and gas and a lot of other expenditures here. And but there comes a point in time when a business can't support the cost of the overhead in the county. I'm not sure that I could afford to buy my property now, and we've been there for 20 years.
Good point. Anyone else have a comment? I'm going to switch gears in a second. Yes?
Yeah. I appreciate you guys inviting all of the business owners in this area to come and talk about the importance of business in the area. But I'm not sure exactly how this process works. I guess we've been, my name is Joey Samuel from Elite Spice. We've been in the area for 30 years. And I think it was about 5 years ago, we had some Howard County development people come in and talk to us about what was supposed to happen in the area. And it was, you showed stats that this area is heavily industrial, and business, you know, holds a strong base in the area. Mm-hmm. But the whole talk 5 years ago was about residential. It was all about residential, and the truth is, over the last 5 years, all that's happened in the area has been residential development. And to go along with some of the points that other people made, is that those two things, industrial and residential, don't always mix next to each other. And I think, you know, we saw pictures 5 years ago in terms of development of infrastructure in the area, where Route 1 was to be widened. I mean, I saw plans. I saw them. I don't know how you guys, if you were involved in this 5 years ago, or if you're new on it, and you know what happens from a plan 5 years ago to today. But there were plans for the road to be widened. There was supposed to be a middle lane. There was like a median too. There were like trees. There was like, I mean, I saw across, we're on Montevideo, across from us, there was supposed to be a corporate office center with a fountain in the middle, and then people walking along the road. And like people said already, you know, Route 1 is a 50-mile-an-hour road. No, I mean, people it's not so safe to walk right along the edge of the road. So, there have been plans before, they didn't get completed, except for that the residences got built. So like, now people live there, but there aren't the infrastructure in place to handle it, and now, traffic in the area is a mess. Trying to get up and down Route 1 around 95, around 5 o'clock or around 5 p.m. or 8 a.m. It's really hard for cars to move around, let alone the mix of trucks and residential cars trying to commute to their places of work. So I guess this is just kind of me rambling, but like I don't know how this like actually gets executed. There was a plan before, it didn't get executed, and now we're in a place where, okay, we're 5 years later, this has all been done, and you're asking for industrial companies' opinions of what to do. There was a plan, and it just doesn't seem like they kind of align with each other.
I guess what I'll say about that is that everyone in this room has a plan. Your ability to execute the plan varies based on your capabilities, based on the organization you have, based on your resources. And this plan, or this effort is going to be no different. But it's going to, I think what we're recognizing is that the county needs to be in the position to implement. Can't just be in the position to recommend or suggest an outcome without being an active participant in that outcome. So if you're going to say, okay, here's the vision for the corridor, have at it, figure it out on your own, and it wasn't that's not the proper way to say it, but in essence it was private sector, here's our expectations, here's our regulatory sort of requirements, you figure out how this happens. That's not how this gets done. It's not how other parts of the country have been successful in getting these things done. So it's going to require a more active, engaged, sort of participatory involvement, and it's going to be at specific locations where things can occur. And I can't speak for the previous efforts. All I can say is that the issues haven't been resolved, they haven't been solved. Our recommendations that come out of this will have been vetted at some level by the property owners who are involved in those areas, the real estate development communities, the community that would be engaged as part of those redevelopment efforts. So these ideas will be coming to with a certain weight and validity, and we will be basically creating a path to those projects by determining their financial feasibility. So if you're saying, how does one actually execute that? Well, it starts with, can this be done feasibly, and can people get a return on their investment? Because that's kind of what we're asking them to do. Take on this difficult, complex project, come out the other end with your shirt still on your back, with your business intact, and do something positive for the corridor. This is a list of things that I think people in the past would have said, these are all important. And I suppose the question I'm posing to you right now is, if we see success on the corridor, will we even recognize it? Or do we have such divergent opinions about what that is that we'll just sort of write that off as, well, okay, that was nice, but that's not exactly what we had in mind. So would we even see it and recognize it if it's right in front of us? How do you define it? Is it making the corridor look a little bit softer and more appealing? You talked about the median and the planting. Is there a need for some of that? Maybe you can't do that on a 50-mile highway. Do you have sidewalks along 12 miles? Probably not realistic. But are they important in certain areas where people are clustering? Yeah, they probably are. Your comment. Oh, go to you right after.
Yeah, thank you. And to that point, you're obviously right. I mean, the corridor, it's not a length, it is segments. And each segment has to be addressed individually to what the needs are for the area. Speaking specifically for the northern part, going up to Baltimore County, I have a small development interest on Main Street in Elkridge. And hopefully in the consideration, in all these beautifications work great up where we are, probably aren't going to work too great and even be counterproductive where the industrial areas are. But one of the challenges that we have for Main Street and its redevelopment is accessibility. There is no parking. It's very hard for the public to get there. And hopefully what this initiative is taking advantage of is, or seeing at least, is the potential for the river, the park, to be incorporated into a redevelopment of the northern end. Consideration of what Baltimore County is doing, because they have Guinness, and obviously they have a, they have their plan. They have a trail. They want to link all the trails together between Baltimore, Howard County, and all that is through Route 1 at the river. So hopefully in this, there's consideration of elements that are outside the county, outside the box for the state park. And, you know, as you said, it's going to be a different answer for the segments of along Route 1.
Yeah, there is no cookie cutter approach that you're just going to drop in different areas and say, okay, you all do the same thing. It doesn't work that way. Yes, sir.
I think the county is at a significant crossroads with the private development industry here in the county. The political climate has made it very difficult throughout the county. There's several dilapidated, underutilized properties along Route 1 that have to be removed to assist the development of properties around that property and up and down the corridors. And when private developers face significant headwinds and difficulty getting base level approvals for when they're willing to take on significant environmental cleanup efforts and develop at levels that are no more density than what the existing zoning allows, I think it's going to send a signal to the private development industry about how willing, and able the county is to really redevelop Route 1.
That's the reality here. So if you're going to say, Mr. Developer, go figure out that difficult site that has a sort of blighted building or vacant building. You figure that out and put something nice there that we want to see on there. There's all sorts of challenges before you put that first foundation in for that new building. That is a sort of creates a disincentive for wanting to do that. I think what this process does, though, will focus on those opportunities where an investment, public and private investment, is possible and needed. It sort of will be presented to the community. They will have to essentially respond to that. They'll have comments. They will, who knows, they may not like the ideas at all. We will be asked to go back and revise those ideas. In essence, what we're doing is we're sort of starting to cut through the brush for the development community or the property owner to say, here's a project here. Community, do you like it? We're cutting the path to it. By your agreement that these are good, solid recommendations and ideas, the developer can now say, okay, we have a path to a project. I need to sort of stay consistent with that concept in some way. But I see the opportunity to do that without getting my head handed to me by trying to cut through that brush myself. And that's part of what is being laid out here, is a way to get people to the solution that is needed at a specific location and not expecting them to figure out all the problems and solve them on their own and then fight the battle with people who are in opposition to it. It's just an unreasonable expectation. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm a developer as well, and we've done some stuff along the corridor. And practically, what's the first thing you do? You turn in a plan. Before you turn in a plan, you meet with the community, and I don't care what you propose, there are going to be 100 people against you. So now you get through that. Maybe you have to have some zoning done. Oh, good, we'll go in front of the planning board and get them to come out in front of the planning board and turn this down, and maybe you have to have zoning. That's going to be impossible these days. By the way, I don't know if you're familiar, there's a moratorium coming very shortly. So there's not going to be any new residential coming for I don't know how many years. If there is, there's going to be probably an impact fee to get past that because the schools are a problem. I don't know the solution. We would love to develop various properties along Route 1. We don't have the courage to try it now. It just does not make economic sense.
Thank you for that comment. And we're up against our deadline, so I'm prepared to stop the conversation if you want to. If you want to continue, we can continue a little bit longer. Yes.
I'm Isaac Samuel of Elite Spice. I'll follow up on what my son Joey said a few minutes ago. So one of the things that I see about this whole planning process is that, okay, here we are talking to Howard County, but then we're being told that, well, it's a state highway that kind of makes some of the decisions. And, I don't know, there's no engagement with them about the whole process.
Oh, they will be engaged. I alluded to before that they will be engaged.
Well, we've had a meeting with them about 4 years ago, and a whole lot of our neighbors, business owners, came to the meeting and kind of like, okay, being ignored. But we're a major business there, an employer, and we need to have the trucks access Route 1.
We will have additional meetings with them. I mean, this is how this gets done. I mean, there's invariably state highways add another level of challenge that we have to overcome, but we will be meeting with them, we will be asking them for changes consistent with this planning effort. Yes?
I just wanted to sort of chime in on that. I mean, I've heard, we've been residential and retail developers, but obviously the corridor is very heavily industrial. And, we talk about the 50 mile an hour to state highway. We need to get trucks in and out. Trucks and pedestrians don't go well together. I did notice there's a traffic planner in the group, and all I can ask is that you really do engage, state highway. I think Route 1, in my own opinion, needs to be slowed down, or at least whenever 95 gets backed up, everybody bails onto Route 1. So Route 1 ceases as a viable corridor to move anything at those times. The trucks need to get in and out, and I agree, in the plan, I'm hoping things are sort of developed in nodes. Obviously, you take all the existing business owners into consideration, but something that makes it easy to get on it. The trucks aren't driving all the way up and down Route 1. They're getting on at 95, or they're going, to Anne Arundel, and I'm probably speaking out of place, but ideally to make it easy for the trucks to get in and out to where they need to go to, discourage just the long-haul traffic all the way up Route 1 so that it stays a traffic path, and somehow, come up with a good traffic plan that makes it easier for the industrial properties to maybe grow and, bring the employment and more people in. I think the reason residential's doing so well right now is because that corridor's a little less expensive on housing. It's close to NSA and Fort Meade. No one's talked really about that connection. I know there was some discussion about, talking about Guinness and North. I think we do have to look a little bit outside of just the county for some of those connections and see why the people are coming to the areas they're coming. I know we're doing relatively well because we're a half a mile or a quarter mile from 95 entrances, and we just have a great location. Again, you have to make it easy to get in and out to the places and not just congest it. So hopefully,
it's a good point, and from a development perspective, people aren't necessarily looking at political boundaries and saying, well, that's absolutely essential that it be on this side of that boundary. Fort Meade has 56,000 people working there, and it's expected to grow another 10,000 in the foreseeable future. It's a huge employment base. It's the biggest one in Maryland. People need to find housing within reasonable proximity of that location. Whether they cross over into Howard County is immaterial to them. They need good, affordable, good housing. So if this gentleman puts up new residential development, he has a reasonable shot that he would be serving this larger area. So we need to be mindful that the boundary doesn't really mean anything. I mean, the market sort of blurs those lines, and it's much bigger than what we're talking about today. Yes, go ahead.
The Route 1 corridor to me is, I'm a girl, okay? We're going to use strand of pearls, okay? Yep. It's one unified thing. It's Route 1. I have a unique perspective because I actually live on the property that I manage. I manage Free State Self-Storage. And so this is my home that you're talking about. And many of you, your home is your business. It's where you make your money and where your heart's at. Okay, so what we're talking about is how to make the changes to make this home feel good. And when I say it's a strand of pearls, it needs to be looked at that way because each residential section is unto itself a neighborhood. It's home. And in between lie the trucking companies and the businesses that make that community work and function. And when we forget that, when we look away from that, we lose so much. How do you make your trucking company work? You're going to get new zoning. How do you get that? Well, why doesn't the county look at a give and take? We'll look at rezoning your property if you're willing to do a 25-foot setback and put some capital into making maybe berms and a sidewalk along the road. But you can't even offer that to these people when you don't have a written plan that you can go to and say, okay, 20 years down the road, because this is the new one that I've been reading, was something for 2030, okay? Down the road, we want this road to be 6 lanes wide. We want it to have pedestrian walkway, but we want to include the industrial community in between the pearls, the chain that holds everything together. You know, so I guess what I'm saying is it would be really nice for the county to say, this is what we want to see, and how can you help us make it happen?
Larry, what do you want to do on time?
I think we have one more over here, and then that's probably time to get back to work.
Yep.
One quick question. I'm John Simler. I'm a commercial real estate person on the corridor. Been doing it down here for close to 20 years. I'm just curious, in the representation of the room, several of the faces and names I know, how many people were involved in the comprehensive rezoning when the Route 1 corridor revitalization started, by a show of hands? How many people sat in the charrettes 10 or 15 years ago?
How many people were affected?
No, sat in the meetings and were involved in the charrettes 10 or 15 years ago when the comprehensive rezoning was done, when the CAC zoning was created, when the CE zoning was created. I know several people. Bob, did you attend? Steve, I think you probably attended. I'm curious how many other people, because there's a lot of new faces. A lot of what was done then, the same comments that are being made now were made then. And unfortunately, you know, history repeats itself. All the easy development, not only on Route 1, but Route 40, Howard County, anywhere else, you know, has been done. This is where the hard stuff happens, and unfortunately, we're all finding it that history is repeating itself. We're running into the same obstacles. We need to find where the difficulties are. 175 is still a failing intersection. Guilford Road is still a failing intersection. You know, we haven't gotten through those challenges. I represent developers, individual property owners, people trying to realize their retirement. You know, they're all frustrated. We do need to have, you know, as we pointed out, these nodes of development, local property owners that want to grow their businesses in the county. They're all saying the same thing. Hey, we want to find it. There is a means to a solution. There's a lot of underutilized properties. I think there's a lot of great stuff. I think getting it on a map, some people suggested, would really help, seeing where we can point these things out, because a lot of it is being repeated from what we've done before.
Well, let me leave you with this comment. The difference perhaps this time is the fact that I have no expectation that you're going to figure it out on your own as an individual company or maybe even a group of companies. My expectation is that we're going to have to identify these opportunities and come up with a solution that works in those areas. It's not just identify them on a map and say this is a good place for things to happen. It's how are they going to happen? Who's going to be involved in them? And what needs to be brought to bear to make them happen? If there's no incentive for someone to come together to solve that problem, it would never get solved. So I guess I'll leave you on that comment. The onus is on me in the spring to come back with some ideas and concepts and show you the path to how those things happen. If I haven't done that, you need to remind me that I haven't done that, but that's the charge here. It's not just putting the circle on the map and saying this is a good place. Thank you all for spending some time this morning.
My name is Peter Conrad. I'm a Deputy Director here at Planning and Zoning, and we really appreciate everybody coming this morning. A lot of good ideas, some things, as John mentioned, that we've been hearing before. So as a series of next steps, we're going to have some workshops that will, open houses that will occur on the corridor coming up next month. So these will be open houses that will display some of the information that Russ has already talked about, where we're looking at these opportunities, nodes, if you would, along the corridor. So since you've all been invited to this event today, we'll certainly have you on our mailing list and give you more detailed information about the open houses coming up. So that's the next event that'll occur this month. And as Russ mentioned, we will have developer panels and a number of opportunities for you to be re-engaged in 2019. So do you have any other closing comments?
No, thank you very much for...
So thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.